All right, and hello folks, welcome back to part 3 of this tutorial sequence. We achieved a breakthrough by the German army on the last turn, and now let's see how this game is going to end in now the second fortnight of August 1942. So again, new fortnight, it's going to start with the active player, whoever has the initiative on this particular season. German player gets to go first in the dry weather, so let's see what happens. First thing we're going to see is the German army is going to activate their Army Group A. So previously the Army Group A was further north near Kamenskoe, but the Germans were able to move this Army Group A just like any other unit, move it further to the front, and now this time it's actually being activated. So it's actually deploying from Salsk to Kropotkin, and this area is actually German controlled. So basically Germans are going to be able to deploy this HQ in a friendly controlled area. You can only deploy in friendly controlled areas. And so this HQ is going to blitz, and this time we're going to have a double movement and double combat sequence, and that's basically the command phase. What follows next is the movement phase, already starting with this unit from Krasnodar. It's basically moving to Novorossiysk and securing that port over there. Then we have a unit that was formerly in Kropotkin moving from there and reinforcing the contested hex of Maikop. We don't have to worry about a river crossing this time around when we're moving the unit from Kropotkin to Maikop, because it's already been previously contested by that German armored corps, so the river crossing has already been established. This HQ, by the way, is a regular HQ, so it's not a Supreme HQ, it's a regular HQ, so its command range is defined by its command value. So all units within 2 hexes away from this HQ are within range. So pretty much all these dark squared units that you see north, right on the same level as Rostov there. I want to say it's the same latitude as Rostov. Looks like Germans move a unit from Rostov and both units from Rostov, and they move them to the north, or I guess to the east, but north of Army Group A. Another unit here is moved from east of Salsk, and it's actually going to attack Stavropol, or excuse me, Armavid from the direction of Stavropol. That's going to be a river crossing. And then I think another unit that was way up there is actually going to move to the south and also support that attack. So this last unit moved 3 hexes across, 2 diagonal, and then the last step across here to Armavid. So the Armavid hex is a newly contested hex. 2 German units are attacking there, and they both are newly contested. They're both moving across river hex sides, so this is going to be a river assault. Finally, we indicate where we want the airstrike. The airstrike is going to be at Maikop. Let's see how the battle plays out. And I think that pretty much sums up all the movement. So yeah, we're going to start here with the Battle of Maikop. We can see that the Germans are attacking with 2 armored corps, quite strong. Soviets have that level 3 infantry, and Germans are also having an airstrike. So we start with the airstrike. Airstrike scores a hit, a pretty good hit against the Soviets there, so that's going to be ouchie. Soviets are reduced to 2. Now the Soviets get to roll. They score no hits. They scored a 5, but again, infantry only roll in single fire. So no hits there. Now the German attackers get to roll. And I think I rolled this armored unit first, and then I also rolled the second armored unit. And all together, they score 3 hits altogether. 1 from the first German armored unit, 2 from the second. Altogether, that's going to be 3 hits, plenty of hits in a area, clear terrain area, single defense, no double defense. And so this Soviet unit is going to be defeated and destroyed. Germans now secure Maikop. Nice. Next major battle we have is going to be east of Maikop, Armavid. This is a river assault. Let's see, no airstrike. So the defenders get to roll first. They score 1 hit, but no repulse. That hit's going to be applied to the German infantry unit there, since it's the cheaper of the two. Germans get to roll, and they score 1 hit with their armor, and it looks like their infantry miss. And so they score 1 hit against the Soviets there. That unit's going to be reduced to a level 2, from a level 3 to a level 2 infantry. And so that's going to sum up the first round of basically command, movement, and combat. Now we can move on to the blitz phase. And the way you do a blitz phase is you basically deactivate the HQ, or let me rephrase that, you reduce the command value of the HQ, but you keep it activated. So you remove the blitz HQ marker, and then this HQ is going to be reduced from a level 2 now to a level 1. And so now its command range is also going to be reduced to 1. And so the command range of this HQ is only 1 hex in all directions. And so I'm indicating that by all these blue markers that you see. And so only now a small cluster of German units around the HQ are actually within command range. So that's something to be aware of. And so let's see what the German player does on this turn. Looks like the units in my cop, now that they've broken through, they can now proceed. This is all happening in the same fortnight, so you can literally see this as a blitzkrieg. They've smashed the Soviet defenses on my cop, destroyed the Soviet 6th Army, and now they're making their way into Soviet mountainous terrain. Now, typically the Soviets would, or the Germans, or any unit would be able to move across this region without a problem. I mean, in theory, this German unit from my cop could move 3 hexes in length, but because it's moving into mountainous terrain, it actually has to stop. And you can confirm that when you look at the terrain effects again, terrain effects table in the player aid card. You can see that when it comes to movement, that the mountains require that the unit automatically stop once it enters that new hex. And same thing with marsh terrain as well. So some terrain types are just a lot more difficult to move it through, and you essentially can't do it on a single movement phase. You need 2 movement phases to move in and then out of those difficult to move regions. And so mountainous terrain, mountainous conditions, units that move in have to stay there unless there's another movement phase available. So these 2 units are going to move into the mountain, but then stop there for now. But that's still a pretty good position. It means that the Germans now on the next turn are guaranteed to move across the mountains if they have an HQ to spend, because the Soviets can only counterattack with 1 unit. They can't stop both from moving across these mountains. So that's something to point out. And I think the last movement that the Germans are going to do is actually pull out an infantry unit. They pull it out from WWII and actually move it into Stavropol. You can withdraw units into friendly controlled hexes. Stavropol is under the sphere of influence of these 2 German units. But this German unit would have not been able to, let's say, fall back to this hex over here, because that hex actually was still Soviet controlled. So what are the Germans going to do? They're going to pull this unit out, and then since it's an infantry, it can move 2 hexes in clear weather. Again, look at the speed, look at infantry, it's a value of 2 for dry. And basically, by the end of the sequence, the Germans do control all the hexes pretty much on the eastern banks of this new river line, the Kuma River. So just to confirm, for those of you who are still kind of familiarizing themselves with the zone of control, but it's any adjacent hexes where there are no enemy units and there are direct line of sights are going to be under the German control. So these 2 are under German control, but take, for example, this area further north. This is going to be a disputed hex because both a Soviet unit, a uncontested Soviet unit, and a uncontested German unit are influencing this zone of control that you see up there. So anyways, Germans control more territory is the main takeaway. That's really what I just want to point out right now. And so what else? Finally, the Germans are going to leave their HQ, it looks like. They're going to actually leave their HQ behind and try to support this battle here. Even though the Soviet unit's already encircled, they're going to decide to try to support it anyways. So let's see. Germans roll the airstrike misses, and Soviets actually get to roll their defensive hits. They score 2 6s, scoring 2 hits on the German armor. Pretty bad, if you ask me. For the German loss, that was 16 production points for the Germans. Soviets have yet to lose anything. Germans get to roll. They roll 2 4s and score no hits. So basically, the Blitz turn ends finally with the Germans deactivating their HQ for a second time. So now their HQ originally was at 2, but after 2 movement and combat phases, it's reduced to 0. Hidden, back to its hidden status. And now we check the supply status again of the Soviet units. So this Soviet unit is going to be out of supplies because when we figure out the railhead of that Soviet unit, we know that its railhead is going to be at Pyatigorsk. Again, all these areas east of Kuma are presumably still Soviet controlled since Germans have yet to march into that territory. The river line denies the zone of control for this German unit from moving across that river. This Soviet unit is not within 2 hexes away from being in supplies. It would have been if this hex wasn't German controlled, but it is. So unfortunately, there is no disputed or friendly hexes by which the Soviets can trace supplies. So this unit is going to be in a no supply status, and automatically it's going to be reduced by 1 cadre. It's going to be reduced by 1 combat value or 1 combat step, even though, or what I'm trying to say is going to be reduced by 1 combat step, but still alive, even though it's out of supplies. And so the last thing to really do is to change the production values. Why? Because my COP actually is German controlled, but it is still not under German production because the Germans are not able to trace a rail line from my COP to, let's say, Berlin. So because there is no rail line available, the Soviets still control Almavir. The Soviets are going to lose production, right? They're going to lose production by 1, but the Germans are not going to gain anything because the German lines have yet to be fully cleared of Soviet resistance. So that's something to note, is that just because you've taken away the production capability of a region from your opponent doesn't necessarily mean that you gain automatically. You have to ensure that your own supply lines from that production source are available. And so right now, there really isn't. Maybe if the Germans controlled Batumi, they would be able to have another supply line from my COP that go across the Black Sea. But right now, there just is no rail line from my COP, therefore no production from my COP. So that pretty much sums up the turn. We did the command phase, movement, combat phase. We even had a blitz sequence there to double the expenditure of moves in that turn for the Germans. And they even cut off the supplies of a Soviet Union, which sooner or later is going to die. If the Soviets can't save this unit on the next turn, it's going to automatically be eliminated. So overall, pretty good sequence by the Germans. They achieved a second breakthrough, and they now are on their way towards Batumi, Tbilisi, and eventually Baku. So Army Group A, I think for all sakes of argument, are making really good progress, given that it's only been about 2 months of operations. Not even, it's been 6 weeks of operations, and the German army has already moved from Rostov all the way across the Caucasus mountain range that you see. So pretty good sequence. But now let's switch to the Soviet side, and let's see what the Soviets have to say in response to the most recent German blitz. And this is going to be the last sequence, and I think it's going to be the coolest one. So let's see what the Soviets have in stock here. Soviets are going to activate their HQ. So last time, if you remember, in the July 2nd fortnight, the Soviets only activated their Stavka, did a few moves to fall back. In the first fortnight of August, they did nothing. They decided to pass their turn. But this time around, the Soviets do intend on responding to the situation. So they're going to activate their southern HQ. This HQ is actually going to become a Soviet blitz. Yes, the Soviets can blitz just like the Germans can. And let's see what the Soviets decide to do. So the same rules apply as before. all the units within command range of this Soviet field HQ get to move. Of course, units that are newly contested, or units that are currently in a contested hex have to, let me rephrase that. Units in a contested hex are unable to re-enter another contested hex. So I don't think the Soviet player is going to do anything with the units in Stalingrad, but we do have 2 extra Soviet units here. Let's see what they do with them. One of them is actually going to move into Kotelnikovo, and actually the second unit is also going to move into Kotelnikovo for a total of 2 units moving across this battle hex side. We know, if you look at the terrain effect table again, that for clear terrain, the hex side limit is 2, rather than 1 as it was for river crossings. So that means the Soviets are able to move 2 units on this one single turn to reinforce Kotelnikovo. In addition to the previously 2 units they had, altogether the Soviets have 4 units stacked very high in Kotelnikovo, and they're deciding to blitz. Let's see what happens next. Soviets placed their airstrike marker on Kotelnikovo, and now for the actual battle. So let's see, the Soviets get to roll first with their airstrike. They actually score 1 hit against the Germans. Their airstrike is single fire. German armor takes a hit. German armor gets to roll. They score a hit. And we're going to place it on, you always place hits on the strongest units. And I always recommend putting it on your cheapest units. And so the shock army is the level 4. It's more, it's cheaper than your armored unit. So let's place the hit there. And that's the only hit that the Soviet units are going to receive. Soviets get to retaliate. We're going to start with the Soviet armored roll at double fire. And they score 1 hit, which is enough to destroy the German core there and secure the hex once and for all. So now the Soviets have cleared that hex of enemy units. And essentially what we have now is a breakthrough in the front line. There's a gaping hole in the German line between basically south of Kotelnikovo and the other town of Kalash, east, or rather west of Stalingrad. And now the Soviets get to blitz. So again, for the blitz phase, you're going to reduce your HQ before you start the phase, remove the blitz HQ marker, and now all the units within a hex range of 1 of this HQ can move. Again, all 4 of these Soviet units are within range, so they get to move for a second time. And now this is the blitz movement phase. And let's see what the Soviets do. Soviets going to move 1 unit. And remember, they had an armored unit and a mech unit there, so we know that there's at least 2 units that can move 3 hexes on this turn. 1 unit's going to move directly west to Vorshilovgrad and attack German HQ there. Not looking good already. Second Soviet unit's going to move and actually move into Rostov. Oh boy. Finally, a third Soviet unit's going to move and actually take put pressure on that German unit south of Kotelnikovo, southwest. And then I think the last third, or rather fourth Soviet unit in Kotelnikovo is going to stay there and not move at all. And then finally, the Soviets are going to actually pull back their HQ, deactivate it after the blitz phase. And you can actually, if you want to forego your air support, you can actually deactivate the HQ, immobilize it, and at the cost of foregoing your air support or even combat support, you can actually have the HQ mobilize in any direction like the way infantry does. And they end up, this unit basically ends up falling back up there. I think the software glitched, but basically they fall back up there. So this HQ is going to be nice and safe from any German counteroffensive, but the damage has been done already. Now it's important to keep in mind that these Soviet units that are moving way into this Western German occupied territory are going to be out of supplies, but you don't check the supplies until the next opposite opponent's turn. Right now, since this is the Soviet turn, we're actually going to check the supply status of Axis units. And likewise, when it's the Axis player turn again, we can check the supply status of these Soviet units. And so it's important to take note of that simply because whenever you do gamble a breakthrough operation, it's important to know that in order to encircle enemy units, you're going to often have to risk your own units being out of supplies, but the effects of that supply choice won't come into effect until the following turn. So you do have a little bit of leeway there as the attacker to take some risk. You're almost incentivized to gamble on launching encirclement operations at the cost of your spearhead units, who they themselves will be vulnerable, but it may come at the gain, at a greater strategic gain in other ways, as we will see very shortly. So the first battle we have, Soviets are going to attack the German HQ at Władysławgrad. This is the Supreme HQ. None of the HQs have any kind of defensive or combat ability. You can look at the player aid card for unit data. You can see that for the firepower, there is no information. These units do not have any kind of firepower. So basically free rolls for the Soviets. Let's see what they can do. Soviets roll 4 dice. They only score 1 hit though. Again, this would have been an unsupported battle because there is no activated Soviet HQ right now. And so the Germans do get away scot-free, but this HQ now is in a contested battle zone with no friendly units within range in the area to help them out. So it is a bad situation right now for the Germans. It's looking pretty bad. This HQ is contested. Okay. Now we have another battle to do, newly contested battle, which was right over here, south of Kotelnikovo. Let's see how this battle plays out. Germans have infantry there. They roll their dice. They score no hits, no sixes. The Soviets score 1-6, but also unsupported. So the double defense grants the defenders no hits, just like it did in the Władysławgrad battle as well. And so then we've done the 3 phases, just like we've done for the Axis turn, but this time for the Soviet turn. Soviets had a command, movement, combat phase, and even a blitz and movement phase as well. Blitz, movement, and combat phases. Now we have the supply phase. And so let's check the supply status for these German units. Remember, I'm going to delete the railhead markers that we had previously because those railhead markers were indicating Soviet railheads. Let's now check the German railheads. Now, originally, if say Rostov was indeed under German control, the German rail lines would have gone all the way down to even as far as Stavropol, right? Because Stavropol is in a friendly controlled hex, given the zone of control of these other German units. The rail line would have extended from, let's say, Berlin all the way through Rostov, all the way up here to Stavropol. We would have even had another rail line that would have gone to Novorossiysk, that would have come from Krasnodar, right? All of it coming through this rail junction at Tikhoretsk, and you even would have had a rail line all the way up north over here as well, right? All these rail lines, however, all of them, if you were to trace them back to their source, they all basically originated from Rostov. Is the point I'm trying to make. So now, because the rail line at Rostov is Soviet controlled, and by the way, I should probably hide this German unit here. Yeah, let me just do that. Now that basically Władysławgrad and Mariupol are going to be the last 2 locations where the Germans have railheads, all these other Soviet units, let me rephrase that, all these other German units that are now not within 2 hexes away from these rail lines are going to be out of supplies. And that's basically what happened. So we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Altogether, 6 German units are out of supplies on this turn. And you might be thinking, wait a minute, there's still one more supply path that we can talk about. Let's talk about the supply path that's coming from Crimea, because isn't Crimea under German controlled? Therefore, shouldn't there be rail lines that extend from Crimea to, let's say, the Krasnodar Peninsula? And the answer is yes. There is a rail line coming from this town of Kerch, and it is extending further east. But remember, the actual distance of those rail lines has to be 2 hexes from the source. And right now, the only unit that's within 2 hexes from Kerch is the unit at Novorossiysk, right? So only 1 German unit of the original, half a dozen that had just broken through is in supplies. Now you're thinking, well, shouldn't there be supplies that kind of comes from Novorossiysk, that can comes from this port? And the answer is yes. You actually technically get to roll dice and actually determine what is the supply status of your unit. And so you basically get to roll dice, I think, to check the supply status of every single unit to see if they any of them actually would indeed be in supplies. Or the simple way to do it is to roll 2 dice, indicated by this triangle, and depending on the values, if any of those values are repulsives for the supply situation, your units are going to be out of supply. So let's find out. So the Germans roll a 5 or a 6, and or it doesn't really matter who rolls the dice. But when you look at the supply interdiction, right now we have naval parity. So it actually looks like because of naval parity between the Germans and the Soviets, that the Soviets could repulse sea supplies on a 1 or a 3. And it pretty much tells you the supply status of this particular port. So I think actually this port would be in supplies, believe it or not. And in fact, by extension, maybe not all the German units are out of supplies. If that's the case, I think actually the German railhead, may actually extend way over here. If Novorossiysk is within supplies and acts as a supply source, I think actually I have to really read up on the rules just to be 100% sure, but I'm pretty certain that the sea supply only applies to units within range of that HQ. But I can check. I can go in the rule book, and I'm going to have to do this quite a bit anyway. So let me check now just to be absolutely certain. But it does have to do with basically the interdiction ability of the HQ, and it says here. So attempt to controlled C, and success negates the enemy C applied, right? And so yeah, you basically check the supply lane. So I don't have unit, so that means that there is a C lane coming in through Novorossiysk on this turn, and by extension, the rail line would actually be all the way up here. And actually, if that's really the case, then by extension, all the German units are still in supplies. Interesting. So I've been playing with a technicality here. Still, the situation is looking really bad for the Germans either way, but were it not for that die roll to check the supply status of these units in the Black Sea, the situation would have been really bad for the Germans. Now, that rule that I mentioned, that extra rule that I'm talking about for the sea supply interdiction, really applies to the Eurofront game, which is the entire game. So when you're playing the full game, you get to really focus on that. But if you're only playing the Eastfront game, you don't really have to worry about those extra rules. And if we were only playing on the Eastern Front, these German units would have definitely been out of supplies, given the rule setting, given that the supply situation in the game clearly shows in an enemy-controlled sea zone, indicated by this naval base of Batumi, this whole entire sea zone would have been impassable for supplies. But I decided to add that Eurofront flavor, do the actual dice roll to see if the supply port is available or the supply lane is available. It showed that it was, and ultimately these German units were in supplies. So what's the takeaway? Soviets achieved a brilliant breakthrough, did some serious damage on the enemy, are contesting the German HQ up here, have taken Rostov, but the Soviet supply situation is still quite untenable, and the German situation was almost disastrous, and thankfully, through the lucky roll of a dice, they still have a little bit of extra supplies. And so because of that, I'm actually going to go ahead and move on to the next fortnight. We could have done a September production, let's say. Actually, I'm not going to go ahead and show you the whole fortnight, but in theory, if we were to continue with the sequence, and let's say I were to skip over the production, the Germans could probably have activated this HQ. And even though it's at a level of 2, it can still command some units, and maybe, the Germans would have done something like fall back, try to, reestablish some kind of front line, maybe try to retake Rostov, and possibly try to save this unit, maybe send a unit all the way over and contest that hex to reinforce that situation. Point I'm trying to make is that you can see how from one turn to another, the game can shift dramatically in favor of the different sides. And depending on which faction you're playing as, depending on the lucky rules of the dice, you can end up with some pretty different dramatic situations. And you can see how that command, movement, and combat play a role, how the blitz can play a role, and finally how supplies is also pretty important in the game. So thank you for tuning in this sequence or in this video series. Stay tuned for more as we continue on talking about other parts of the game.